Hi, everyone. My name is Luan, and I'm joining you from Cape Town, South Africa. I'll be your host for this 1 hour webinar brought to you by, of course, the TEFL Academy. So, just a little bit about me. I've been a teacher for over 15 years, and I really love what I do. And I'm really excited to be just a small part of your journey today and for the next hour, of course. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. So, as I run through today's session, how it'll work, general housekeeping rules, please feel free to drop your name and where you're tuning in from into the chat. It's always great to see where everyone's joining from. So, let me check if you're actually listening and putting your names in. I don't see any names just yet, but please pop your name into the chat and tell us where you are tuning in from today. It's very, very exciting to be here with you. Right, so just a little bit about how things will go. We will spend the next, I see the names coming in. Great, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Sandy. Right, so back to housekeeping. We'll spend the next half an hour or so, roughly the first half of the session, covering today's topic, where I will be telling you all the important things you need to know about lesson planning. And then about halfway through, as mentioned, about 30 minutes in, I'll be opening things up for Q&A. That's in our second half. And I do recommend saving your questions until we reach the Q&A section, because if they come through while I'm presenting, there's a chance that I might miss them a little bit later on. Just a quick note that I will be focusing only on today's topic. With the questions you ask, I'll be addressing only the questions related to today's topic. If you do have any questions outside of the topic, remember, we are here for you. On Tutor Support, you send us a ticket, and of course, we're going to answer all those important questions that you might have. All right, so let's have a look at who else we've got here today. We've got viewers from London. Hi, we've got viewers from Namibia, from Turkey, Canada, Sri Lanka, Jamaica. This is so exciting. I could just spend the whole webinar saying hello to you all, but unfortunately, we've got things to get to, right? So thank you for popping your name in. If you are joining right now, also pop your name in and your location. It's always really, really great to see visitors from all around the world, which is the nature of TEFL after all. Okay, so today's topic is actually one that is really, really important, because I think that, what precedes walking into that classroom, what really is so important is your plan, right? Every teacher needs a plan. And that is exactly what we're unpacking today: lesson planning. So let's get ready to get started. So the important thing to understand first and foremost is what exactly is materials for that lesson. So just to recap, what is lesson planning? Involves thinking about the lesson, writing the plan, creating or sourcing materials for those activities. And lessons usually follow a structure that makes it easier for teachers to plan. Imagine there was no structure, right? That would be really confusing. You wouldn't know where to start. And I do feel that those lessons would just be an absolute mess. So thank goodness for plans, right? So usually lessons have a warmer. The warmer is right at the start. Then there's the body of the lesson, and this can take many different forms depending on what skill you're focusing on. And then, of course, there's the plenary right at the end. And this structure provides a stable scaffold for the lesson and really gives you a jumping off point, right? So immediately when you start thinking about a lesson or you watch lessons online, You often think, okay, how did this get started? How do I plan something like this? But as mentioned earlier, there are structures that you can stick to. And I know that many teachers tend to feel like, why should I stick to a structure? And I do hear you because you like that creativity and that easy flow in the classroom. But this is all about planning, right? When planning a lesson, there needs to be a structure. Of course, you can add your own flavor and your creativity in those activities. But when planning, planning is everything, right? So let's move on to what lesson plan bones look like. Right. So let's think about what it involves, right? Lesson planning really involves thinking about the lesson um, first and foremost. And if you think about the lesson, as mentioned earlier, the lesson starts with a warmer, right? And a warmer is one of my personal favorite stages because it really does exactly what it says it does. It gets your students warmed up, right? It introduces the topic of the lesson, and the body is then the main teaching and learning part. I always say that while a warmer is exceptionally important, it is that stage that if a student misses it, they haven't missed actual teaching and learning just yet, right? The core of the lesson is the body. It's the part of the lesson where, as mentioned, the teaching and learning happens. And then, of course, the plenary offers some kind of consolidation, right? A reflection, maybe. And this is very often done in the form of pair work or Q&A. We'll have a look a little bit later on at other activities you can have in the plenary. But there you go, the warm-up, the body, and the plenary. But remember, this is just the external structure. As I said earlier, the body, within the body of the lesson, there are different lesson structures. There's the warm up, there's the body, there's the plenary. Within the body, there's a lot more going on, and it differs slightly from skill to skill. So, warmer body plenary, basic structure. That body of the lesson really just brings together the different elements that are going to be focused on in the actual lesson, right? And then the plenary is used to review what has been learned, perhaps through a whole class discussion, a Q&A. I like peer teaching, where I often tell my students, right, pretend the person next to you missed the lesson, and you've got to tell them in just a few minutes what the lesson was about. And then they change roles. So there's a lot you can do in a plenary, but it is really to consolidate learning. So remember, the WBP, warmer body plenary, can describe the structure of any lesson. Teachers, remember, this is your external structure. And it may incorporate, the body may incorporate PPP, which is present, practice, produce. We'll have a look at that in a second. Or TTT, which is it's test, teach, test. Almost mixed up my acronyms there. All right, so we're going to have a slightly closer look at the PPP and the TTT. Oh gosh, TEFL is all about its acronyms, isn't it? Right? So, as I said earlier, PPP is present, practice, and produce. This is one of the most common lesson structures that you'll come across. And you know what? After all these years in the classroom, it is my fallback. It's the one structure I fall back on because I know that now, after 15 years in the classroom, for me to plan a lesson, 5-10 minutes, PPP structure is my go-to because it's simple, but it gives scope for creativity and all those other extras that you want to put in there, right? So let's have a look at exactly what PPP entails, right? So now remember, you've got PPP, this is in the body, but what precedes PPP? The warmer. And what comes after PPP? Your plenary, right? Now let's get back to the body. So the first P is for present. The presentation stage, this gives your students the information they need to manipulate the language. This is where you are introducing the target language that they are going to learn in that lesson. And this structure can be used for grammar, it can be used for reading, listening, or even a pronunciation lesson. So present, think about it in its literal sense. You are presenting the target language for the very first time. That must happen in the presentation or present stage, not in the warmer, teachers. All right, and then the second stage, as we mentioned earlier, well, that is your practice stage. And your practice stage is where we provide students with a very controlled practice activity, right? And this is to have them focus on the structure. The focus is on accuracy. There's a right answer or a wrong answer. So I like to give activities like worksheets, gap-fill activities, unscrambling tasks, matching activities. So think about the type of activity where the questions are predetermined and the answers are uniform. And this makes checking it quite easy. But can you see it's very one or the other? So controlled practice is exactly that, very, very controlled. And then we get to the third stage, which is produce. Now, here is they also use the language, but in a much freer and more relaxed way. So during this stage, give your students activities where they are encouraged to produce the target language and develop that fluency with communicative activities. So think about role plays, conversation in pairs or groups, a debate if their level is strong enough, storytelling, right? Where they know the target language now, and now they get to sit in a pair or a group and actually communicate using the target language where they see fit. That is what produce is all about. Produce is very often referred to as freer practice, and that's exactly what it needs to be. They need to have freedom with the target language. So that's PPP, present, practice, produce. But remember, what did they have before this? The warmer. And what will they have afterwards? The plenary, right? Now let's have a look at TTT, right? So the TTT structure is slightly different to PPP. And this is because it's all about first seeing what they know, then teaching, and then testing again. Hence, test, teach, test, right? This is a good lesson structure to choose when you plan to introduce a complex topic or contrast a new concept maybe to one that your students already know. So say, for example, you're teaching present continuous for the very first time. Maybe they have, they've learned present simple before. So TTT would be a nice way to introduce the target language here. And the TTT structure gives you the opportunity to find the learner's knowledge gaps while supporting them, of course, through the lesson, to fill these gaps at the same time. And there are 5 stages to a TTT lesson, if we also include what? The warmer, and of course, the plenary at the end. So remember, the PPP, the TTT structures, they make up the body that we spoke about earlier in that lesson plan structure of warmer, body, and plenary. All right, I hope it's making a little more sense to you today. All right, so now we're going to have a look at some of the common features of lesson plans, because a lesson plan is not just a piece of paper with a few ideas of how your lesson's going to go. No, there are some details on a lesson plan, right? And some of the common features that you're going to see on the lesson plans in the TEFL Academy course content and beyond include things like the class level that you're teaching. For example, your pre-intermediate class or upper intermediate class, advanced class, beginner class. So that's the class or the level that you're teaching, right? And then, of course, the date is important, because as teachers, we need to keep track of who we're teaching what to, right? So we need to know, we need to keep track of these things, because you don't want repetition and then your students look at you saying, but we've learned this before. So it's important to date your lesson plans, right? And then also, the topic of the lessons. The topic would be the target language that they're going to be learning. For example, adverbs of frequency, or the present continuous tense, or modals of giving advice. So that would be the topic of the lesson. Something important to adhere to is the length of the lesson, because this is core when planning, right? How long do I have with these students? And that is so important as well. So you write that down, whether it's 60 minutes, whether it's 90 minutes, whether it's 30 minutes, write that down. And then, of course, the number of students. This is important when planning your materials. How many worksheets are you going to make? How are you going to pair them up? Are you going to put them in groups of 3? Quite an important thing to know. And then the final one is the lesson type, right? And when I say final one, just in the first section of the lesson plan, the lesson type, is it a grammar lesson? Is it a vocabulary lesson? Is it a skills lesson? What kind of lesson is it at the end of the day? So there's a lot there, right? But this gives you the picture, I think, the picture of your class and what's to come in the lesson, right? Okay, let's move on our slides. Okay, so we're still looking at those common features of lesson plans. And something else you'll see on a lesson plan is the lesson aim, right? And the lesson aim focuses on the teaching and learning part of the lesson. So ask yourself, when writing your aims, ask yourself, what is the new information or skill that students are going to be learning here? And an example is by the end of the lesson. So always have that end point in mind when writing your aim, right? Because that is your aim. That's what you want to achieve by the end of the lesson. So an example here is by the end of the lesson, students will be able to. And here's an example: to use frequency adverbs to describe daily routines, if you like. So that would be an example of a lesson aim. But remember, there are also stage aims further down on the lesson plan. So this one here is a very universal aim, but it does tell you, or the person looking at your lesson plan, what your students will be able to do by the end of the lesson. And I like that because it helps me plan. I very often start at that point and I work my way back. Just another approach. All right. So we spoke about aims, but something that people also tend to mix up with aims a little bit are the objectives, right? So objectives are a little bit more nitty gritty. So your aim is what you want to achieve by the end of the lesson, but your objectives, these are the little steps taken within the class to achieve the aims. And when we create objectives, we should ask ourselves, are they realistic? Are they measurable? And an example of an objective would be students will use 4 common frequency adverbs to describe their morning routine. Students will complete a controlled activity to focus on accuracy. Students will participate in a role play to talk about the daily routine of someone they know. So your objectives, really think about them as the little steps taken within the lesson in order to achieve that universal aim that we spoke about just a little bit earlier. I know it's confusing because I very often used to get these two confused, but I think the one tells you what you want to achieve and the other one, objectives, tells you how you're planning to achieve this. All right, and then something else you'll see on the lesson plan, something to note is the materials and equipment you will use. For example, technology, are you using an interactive whiteboard? Will you be using worksheets? Will they be online? Will they be hard copy? So something to note down, write it down, because it also gives you an idea of, if you want to redo this lesson, what exactly did you use? Also, remember, when we teach, when we plan lessons, when we become teachers, sharing is caring, right? So very often teachers swap lesson plans, they share them. And I always say that when you plan your lesson, plan it as though you're planning it for another teacher, so that when they look through the lesson plan, they can actually see exactly what they have to do. And that helps. When you've listed your technology, your materials, your equipment, it's very easy for another teacher to borrow this lesson plan and execute it very well and seamlessly in their classroom. Anticipated problems is something you'll see on the lesson plan. And this one is twofold for me, really, because yes, it includes things like technology fails, which happen to me all the time. What backup plan do you have? Will students be able to finish the lesson before the time is up? What added tasks can you prepare for students who finish early? That's a true story. But something else that you also need to think about with anticipated problems is problems within the target language. Will they mix up contractions? Will they revert to their first language? Is there a structure in their first language that will confuse them and make it difficult to learn what you're teaching them? Are the set of vocabulary that you're teaching them? Are there many false friends in their own language that might cause a bit of problem here? So don't only think about the anticipated problems, with the external stuff like the technology and so forth. Also think about what kind of problems they will have when trying to acquire this new target language. I was thinking about the first conditional form just the other day. If I study, I will pass, for example. If I go to the beach, I will swim, right? They sometimes don't see how I go, present simple, is actually to talk about a future possibility. So that is something I would certainly list as an anticipated problem. So think about the language acquisition also. And then also, where there are problems, have solutions, teachers, have a backup plan for all your anticipated problems. If technology fails, do you have paper-based worksheets and visuals? Here in South Africa, we used to have something called load shedding. You would have to have a backup plan for that too. When the power cuts out, time management, do you have extra tasks if a student finishes early? Because like I said, that struggle is very real. So yes, have your anticipated problems, but also plan your solutions. And it's not that we want you to start thinking about things that can go wrong while you're planning, but yeah, we want you to think about things that can go wrong while you're planning, because a prepared teacher, you know the rest. Right, so let's look at the lesson stages, right, for the different types of lessons. So we're going to look at a reading lesson first. And you know what? Before I did my TEFL, I thought, what, a reading lesson? I've got to read to them and then maybe ask them questions. It's so not the case, right? A reading lesson is where they read a piece of text and they need to answer tasks based on the text, not you. The minute you read to your students, it becomes a what? A listening lesson, right? So let's look at a reading lesson's stages. The very first stage, of course, my favorite, the warm-up. And this is where you elicit the possible topic of the text. You could show them some pictures here. And I like to get my students to predict what they think the reading's going to be about through the imagery, maybe through the title. But it's important here that your students get to predict, right? And then we have the second stage, which is the pre-teach vocabulary stage. Now here, you've done your homework as a teacher. You've looked at the text the night before, 2 days before, and you have used a vocabulary profiler to select vocabulary that you think might be difficult for your students. Usually these words are above their level, which is why they need to learn them. So you would have to select some important words that are vital in order to understand the text and words that might cause barriers when they're trying to read it and understand the core message, right? So language level is important. You need to look and use the vocabulary profiler. We recommend a few on the course. Have a look. If you can't find them, ask us on Tutor Support and we'll send it to you, right? So we've got 2 stages so far, right? We have the warm-up and we have the pre-teach vocabulary stage. And then we have the very next stage, which is the first reading stage. And with the first reading stage, we set no more than 2 to 3 questions. And why? Because we're testing those external skills of skimming and scanning. What is skimming? Reading the text quickly for a general understanding of it. Scanning is scanning the text quickly to find 1 or 2 little details. That's it, right? 2 to 3 questions, no more, and it's a quick read. Now, the second reading, of course, is the opposite. It's a longer read. It's a more intensive read, at least 7, 8 open-ended questions. For example, where in the text does the writer speak about this? Why is the writer saying this Find your evidence in the text. How does the writer describe this? And where in the text does he do that? So these questions really get them reading, and they're looking for information, and they're trying to interpret the language in the text, not just quickly find details. This is a meatier, lengthier, more focused area of the reading lesson. Now, remember, after this one, they're tired. They need to communicate a little bit, right? Which brings us to the follow on communicative task. Now, here it could be a small group discussion based on themes from the reading text. It can be a whole class discussion, it can be pair work. But remember that a whole class discussion often means that certain students don't get a chance to speak. So for me, I'm a fan of pair work or small groups, because that way everybody gets a chance to speak. A whole class discussion, a little bit risky because you'll have a few people contributing and others just sitting there saying nothing. And that's not what you want here. This is a communicative task. You want them to speak, right? All right, then we have the next type of lesson is a listening lesson. Now remember, they're listening to something and then they're doing tasks based on the listening material that they've just listened to, right? And again, that first stage is a warmer to elicit the possible topic, excuse me, and also just to get them engaged. Again, you could use visuals, you could use the title of the listening, you could show them a tiny little video, no longer than a minute or so, but immediately they are going to say, this is what I think the listening is going to be about today, through what you've done in the warmer. And again, incorporate pair work, communication if you can. Say to them, right, watch the little clip or look at the photos, and you and your partner decide, what do you think the reading is going to be about or the listening is going to be about? Where have you seen these things before, right? Get them communicating. So important. And also, it's great how you can include speaking at almost every stage. And that's how you would do it in a warmer. Now, remember, we're still on a listening lesson. And the very next stage, similar to the reading, is a pre-teach vocabulary stage. And this is where you've taken the transcript of the listening and you've again put it through a vocabulary profiler. You've looked for words preferably above their level, because these are the words they would need to learn. I wouldn't focus too much on the words at or below their level, because remember, they are likely to know those. Pre-teaching is all about removing those vocabulary barriers. That was a mouthful. So how do we do that? We pre-teach the difficult words. Why? So that when they read the text or listen, they're okay. No difficult words that they get stuck on. Because I don't know if you're like me, but the minute I do not understand a word in a text, I don't move on. I get stuck on that word and I need to look it up in a dictionary or Google it. I cannot move on with my life. And your students are very often very similar. So it's important to pre-teach those words, right? And remember again, yes, use the vocabulary profiler. And then, of course, we have the first listening. And here they are listening for this is an extensive listening, again, 2 to 3 questions. And then, of course, the second listening, again, that deeper, more meaningful listening where they answer questions about what does the speaker say about this and how do you know that they feel this way? Why does the speaker say this? What word does the speaker use to describe this feeling? So can you see it's a bit more intricate? I love the second listening. But what I like more is the follow-on communicative task, where again, they get to speak about the topic. Maybe a set of discussion questions in groups or pairs, maybe a role play. Whatever you decide here, keep it chatty, keep it communicative. Your students need that outlet. After listening or reading, taking in information, they need to talk, right? All right, so we've come to the end of reading and listening. Let's move on to grammar. Now, a lot of you tend to think, and I know because I train teachers on a weekend, I know that the grammar lesson puts the fear of I don't know what into so many trainee teachers, but let's not panic, right? Because again, there's a structure to stick to, and as long as you stick to this structure, you can add your flair and flavor with your tasks, but the structure helps you plan and keeps you anchored in the classroom. And teachers, just FYI, something I did and still do is I keep my lesson plan on my desk wide open, and I walk around to my desk, I pop around, I have a look, I have a look at what I'm going to do next just to kind of center myself, and then I carry on with the lesson. Why not, right? So let's have a look at those stages again. The very first one, of course, the warmer. And this is to establish a context. I like a 5-minute warmer, but hey, if you're having fun with it, you can extend this to 10 minutes, but no more, teachers, no more than 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes is your happy place, right? And then your presentation stage. Now, I will say that while we present the new target language, maybe a tense, maybe it's modals, maybe it's adverbs of frequency, while we present it here, we don't just give away the target language. No, we try to elicit. If you're teaching the modal should, try to elicit by saying, right, this is a good idea, right? It's going to help them, right? How would I say that in English? I what go to the doctor? I should go to the doctor, right? So we try to elicit. Elicit the form. Ask them where the subject is. Ask them where the verb is. What tense is the verb? What form is the verb, right? And then, of course, concept checking. My favorite thing in the whole world is concept checking. Checking that they've understood the function, right? If it's a tense, don't use the tense when you concept check. Keep your language simple. If it's something that, like the past simple, ask them, right, I went to the beach. So when does this activity happen? Is it finished? Is it happening now? Ask them really simple, graded concept questions. That all happens in the presentation stage. You are super busy during the presentation stage. But here comes the practice stage where you can relax a little bit, right? So you give them their worksheets and they start doing their accuracy-based task. You can monitor, you help when they get stuck, but you let them work quietly. And then, of course, you can do error correction. You can check in pairs, because now that they've nailed the accuracy and the structure, there comes the production stage, the freer activity where they get to speak. Again, a role play, storytelling, negotiation activities, right? I love these because it gives the students the freedom to use various forms and select their moments when to use the new target language you've just taught them. That's what makes a task truly freer. So that there is the structure for a grammar lesson. And remember, PPP, here it is again, presentation, practice, and production. And of course, before we have the warmer, right at the end, we have the plenary equals 5 stages. Nice, right? All right, but now let's have a quick look at the timing of each of these stages, right? The warmer, again, I like a 5-minute warmer, no more. But if it carries on to 10 minutes, that's okay too. But I will say, teachers, try not to go over 10 minutes, because remember, the warmer is just to engage your learners and to set the context, right? And should you use the target language in the warmer? The answer is no. Should you expect that your students use the target language in the warmer? No, it's not what the warmer is about. Because in the presentation stage, this is where you're eliciting your example sentence in your target language for the very first time, right? And your presentation stage can often take 15 to 20 minutes. If you're looking at about an hour of a lesson, 15 to 20 minutes for that presentation stage. Because remember, you're busy there. You're eliciting your model sentence or your example sentence. You're eliciting the form, and you are asking concept questions to check understanding of meaning or function. So yeah, it's a busy 15 to 20 minutes. I like the presentation stage because it's very often where you see those light bulbs going off and your students have got that aha look on their faces. My favorite. And then, of course, practice stage, 15 minutes roughly. And then the production stage, 20 minutes. Now, remember, to tell students to talk about one particular topic for 20 minutes, it's a little long, right? So what you can do here is you can divide and you can say, I'm going to plan 2 speaking tasks. The first one is a group discussion, and the second one is a role play or storytelling. And I'm going to divide that into 10 minutes, 10 minutes. That gives them a change of pace, and it gives them, a little bit of freedom within the target language, and just to have some fun with what they're doing. All right. The final few elements that you're going to see on a lesson plan is these funny little patterns. Do you see them? Right. So we've got interaction. That's one of the columns on a lesson plan. And you'll see these funny little squiggles there. T to C, T to S, S to SS, S to S. And what does this mean when it goes home, right? Simplified, your interaction is just who is speaking to whom at any given point during the lesson. If the teacher is giving instructions, it's T to C, teacher to class. If two students are working together in a pair, maybe it's S to S. If students are giving feedback, or the whole class is giving feedback or doing presentations, maybe it's C to T. It depends. Now, there's no set way to do this, but in our course content, we give you a few examples and we give you a little bit of freedom to play around with these. But if you get stuck, just ask us on Tutor Support. But yes, interaction, just think about it in a simplified way. Who is speaking to whom at any given point, right? Me speaking to you right now is T to C. Later on, when you ask questions, then it's C to T, but I answer you as well. So yeah, the interaction is busy right here. All right, and then when planning your interaction, yes, you need to plan that too. Consider differentiation and inclusion, right? Which means it shouldn't just be TC, 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 boring and just your voice, right? When in fact, you want your students to speak. So inclusion is all about, ensuring that all students, regardless of, their abilities, their additional learning needs, that they've all got access to learning. And I think as teachers, that is such an honor to create lessons that just speaks to everyone in your classroom, right? It's important to create that inclusive environment. It's important to create that comfortable environment to accommodate and meet the learning needs of all your students. And believe me, it's not that your lesson's got to be super busy to do this. No, you just add a little something, a visual for those visual learners, something to listen to for those auditory learners, a very controlled practice task for those students who are really stuck on structure. There's a little something for everyone, and it's just in one lesson. It's possible. It also gives students the opportunity to really reach their goals and also realize their potential, because nothing is more beautiful than a student saying, I can do this. This is easy. That is a fantastic thing to watch as a teacher. Promise you. Watch the space. All right, so we've got the term inclusion, but now we've got the term differentiation, right? So what does differentiation mean? Well, this refers to the ways in which a teacher can support students with different learning needs in the same class, right? Designing lessons based on their learning styles, right? So think about you're grouping students by shared interest, topic, or ability for assignments, assessing learning through formative assessments, managing the classroom to create that safe and supportive environment. Very similar to your inclusion, but more about recognizing the differences in the class and actually speaking to those differences. And remember that giving feedback, it's such an important part of your lesson, but it isn't simply focused on error correction, but the creation of that safe space, once again, telling them what they've done right and what they can work on going forward. Even as an adult, a teacher, I find that when someone gives me feedback, tell me what I did well, and then tell me how I can grow, how I can improve going forward. So important. All right, so I think that is the end of me presenting to you. We've gone a little bit over time, but we had so much to say, right? So that is what lesson planning entails. I know it's a lot, and for me personally, it's a lot in a 1-hour webinar, but it's just to show you that no two lesson plans need to be exactly the same. There are different structures. There are stages. Each stage has its purpose. It's not just there for fun and frills. If you think about going back to the warmer, why do we need a warmer? Right? Students need to get activated. They need to engage with something that brings them from chit chat to, with various people to something focal, right? Then you have presentation. It introduces something. It opens up that door. Practice when they knuckle down and get into a worksheet, and then produce where they feel all, I can use this now, and they start speaking. And then the plenary, that little cup of coffee right at the end of a meal, just to consolidate everything before you get up and go. So every single stage has its purpose. I really hope that it's made you more open to lesson planning and also feeling a bit more comfortable with all these terms. But remember, those of you who are starting the course or not quite reached all these levels of lesson planning just yet, please don't stress. On the course, things are a lot more unpacked. You take your time through the units, making friends with all these terms and taking your time with these new avenues of teaching. So please don't stress if these terms are a little bit new to you. All right. So guess what? We've come to Q&A, and that is where you get to ask me all those very important questions. So I see that lots and lots of names have still come in. We have from South Africa, hello. We have the Netherlands, amazing. All right, South Carolina, Ottawa, amazing. Okay, so now's the time for your questions. I'm very happy to see that no questions have come in during the actual presentation because I very often miss those. So please punch your questions in right now and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Okay, so we've got a great question. Okay. So how much detail do you put into the lesson plan, right down to the finest detail? Now, you know what, Infinity, I actually, in the beginning, used to plan every little detail, but I'll tell you, it took me a day and a half to plan one simple lesson. And nobody wants that, right? So the detail is just enough for you to see what the activity entails. Now, think about it this way. When we mark your lesson plans on the course or in the assignments, we don't unfortunately get to watch you teaching the lesson, right? And when you are planning your lesson, we need to be able to visualize exactly what's happening. And the lesson plan is basically that visual. So when I say it needs to be detailed, enough for us to understand, of course, what you're doing, but too much detail is very confusing because remember, the lesson plan is a tool in the classroom for you to use to keep yourself on track too. So if it's too intricate, it gets confusing. So what we've done is that with most of our assignments, we've given you a model lesson plan to follow. And even when we don't give you a model right before the actual assignment, there is in fact models in the units preceding the assignments to show you how much detail is required. Because I will tell you that when a lesson plan doesn't have enough detail, I do tend to return them and I say to them, right, I can see you're on track here, but I need more detail because I need to see. Then I refer you to one of the models or the model assignment on the assignment page, and I'll say to you, right, have a look at that one, look at the level of detail, and try to incorporate a little bit more content. So there are models on the assignment pages, but also for those assignments where there are no models, there are models in the preceding units. So please don't worry about that. All right. Okay, and our next question, can we get these presentation slides? No, but remember, everything we present is in our course content. It's right there. And also, you've got access to these actual webinars where you can watch and rewatch as many times as you need to. All right. Okay, so we've got the acronym VARK, VARK, and remember, teachers, that it stands for visual, auditory, read, right, and kinesthetic, right? And it obviously helps teachers to understand students and how they learn these different ways, and also to vary their teaching methods. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is very difficult to incorporate absolutely everything because you also don't want your lesson plan to be too busy. But there are little ways of incorporating everything, right? Visual learners make sure that there are pictures to activate what they know. Auditory learners, maybe there's something to listen to. Also, discussions, pairs, your explanations. Read, write, these are their worksheets, maybe some notes that they've made, maybe a textbook. And then, of course, your kinesthetic learners. Now, these are learners that learn with hands on activities, experiments, role play. So, there, already there's something there. Role play, have them do a little survey, have them move around the class. Total physical response can absolutely be incorporated. So it's not that you're planning a lesson purely for visual or purely for auditory or purely for reading or kinesthetic, but incorporating little bits and pieces that stimulate all those learners in one lesson. And like I said, it's possible because even with kinesthetic, think about a role play, right? When they are playing their roles, there's listening. So that auditory aspect comes in. There's the kinesthetic because there's that exchange of energy and movement between them. So already there is, and then you could give them a few images to prompt the role play. There's the visual. So see, in one activity, there are so many aspects already included. So again, it's possible. It's busy, but it's possible. Okay, and then we've got an excellent question, MFP. Now remember, we spoke about MFP in that PPP structure, and MFP is dealt with in the presentation stage, meaning, form, pronunciation. Meaning is synonymous with function in grammar, meaning, form, pronunciation. And Rosemary, please don't worry. Oh, MFP is just dealt with to death in the course. You'll be very, very good friends with MFP by the time you're done with the course because it rears its head in so many ways. When teaching vocabulary, when teaching grammar, it just comes up so many times. So believe me, you'll make good friends with this acronym. Also, those of you who do not know these terms, have a look at our glossary. Everything is there as well. And if you can't find the glossary or you've forgotten, tutor support. That's what we do. All right. I just don't want to miss any of these, right? Okay, so I've got a question here. Can we get some book or document based on lesson plan? So remember, the course has got many examples of lesson plans, downloadable examples that you can screenshot and paste into your files. There are plenty on the course. Okay, another one of my favorite things is a vocabulary profiler. Now, a vocabulary profiler is an online tool that you can use you punch words into it, you type words into it, and it tells you what level those words are. So if you're teaching a B1 level class and you're giving them a reading, you have to pre-teach some of those difficult words, right? So you put the reading, the script of the reading into the profiler, copy paste, and the profiler will point out all those words that are above your student's level, B2, C1, and then you know, okay, those are the ones I'm going to pre-teach. So a vocabulary profiler helps you select text that is suitable for the level of your class. It helps you see what level the words are within a text that you have to work with. So in other words, which words to pre-teach. And it also helps you if you are not working with authentic material, but maybe something out of a book, and you want to change some of the words to make them simpler. The profiler will tell you, right, so this word is too high for your class. Like, for example, there are too many options on this menu. Your students might not know options, right? So because options will show up as high level, then you know, okay, that's the word I need to rewrite. Let me remove options and type choices. Choices is lower. My students will get this. So Rebecca, vocabulary profilers, I use them every day. I've got it saved on my desktop. I don't even remove it because I use it every single day. We recommend a few on the course please have a look. And if you can't find them, send us a ticket and I'll send you the vocabulary profiler. A very popular one is vocabkitchen.com/profile. Try that one, it works. All right. Okay, so as mentioned, you won't have access to the actual slides, but you will have access to the content on the site. And then, of course, you'll also have access to rewatch this webinar as many times. And those of you who feel a little overwhelmed with all the content, remember the webinar is to introduce you to the idea of lesson planning and to show you that there are many structures. This webinar is not to teach you everything you need to know about lesson planning. So take it all in your stride and ask questions along the way as you go through your course. Okay, so there's a question here. Can we apply 2 activities in one warmer? I mean, if you've got the time, but remember, a warmer is meant to be a quick little stage to engage your learners. It's not really meant to be a very busy stage, but just gets your learners focused, engaged, and kind of thinking about the topic that's coming. So I would say simplify the warmer as much as you can. Yes. Are there some model templates? Yes, there are. And remember, these are in the course, right? So when you get to the unit of teaching grammar, there will be an example grammar lesson. When you get to the unit of teaching vocabulary or reading, there'll be example lesson plans. And also when you do the assignments, we also give you model lesson plans just to help you out. I think the only one where we do not give a model is, for example, assignment A, because it's a broken up one. But before you get to the assignment, there is a model in preceding units. So don't worry, you'll be able to find all the information you need. Okay, so if you ask AI to create pictures for you to use as visual examples, is that considered plagiarism? So remember, we just dissuade AI in any shape or form. And it's not to say that it's, we're not realistic. Of course, you're going to use AI once you get out there and teach. Of course, I use AI when I plan some of my lessons. But the important thing is that we're assessing your knowledge and your ability to find things, right? Also, remember, we want you to reference things because referencing is part of the course assessment. So, referencing means I've found something online, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to reference it. I do believe that we do accept certain things like images if you've used AI, but your worksheets and so forth, absolutely not. The problem is, though, that when you embed these images in your files, they immediately raise your AI score and your marker will not open it up if it exceeds our 30%. So just be mindful of that when using AI. All right, so we've got a question here. Do you also pre-teach vocabulary for reading lessons? If you look through the webinar, we've done this. We've gone through the stages of a reading lesson, Edward. And the stages of a reading lesson, warmer first, and then guess what? Second stage, teaching vocabulary. So absolutely, you pre-teach vocabulary. And the reason we do it is your students are going to read a text and they're going to come across words they do not know. And then that joy, the skill of reading comes to a dead halt. And we don't want that. So we pre-teach words, yes, 100% in a reading lesson. And it gets done before we give them the text. That's when the pre-teaching happens. That's when you're eliciting, teaching the pronunciation, and concept checking them. A nice stage. All right, so what level of English do you need to be? All right, so this doesn't really relate to today's webinar, but I will tell you that on the course, your level of English needs to be C1 or up. Okay, I'm going to ask that the questions are related to lesson planning because that's what we're covering today. If you do have any questions over and above what we're doing today, send them to Tutor Support. Okay, so, right, another one, Tutor support is back online, so please ask if you have any questions. All right, any other questions about lesson planning? I'm going to try and stick to those for today. So if you don't mind, lesson planning questions only. And then just a reminder that today's webinar will be available within a couple of days and you'll be able to watch. But if you do have questions or you can't find the webinars, tutor support is up and running. Student support, they might be off for a little while, but they will be back up and running very, very soon. So if your query has not been answered yet, I guarantee you it'll be answered very, very soon. But tutor support, we're online, we're ready, and we're waiting for you. All right, any other questions about lesson planning? And if I've missed your question, please retype it, because I don't want to go through today and actually miss the important questions that you're asking. All right, any other questions? Let's see. Okay, this is a good question. I'm going to definitely have. Right, and remember, I'm only going to answer questions about today's webinar. All right, and this is definitely one of them. Is it a good idea to combine reading and pronunciation in the same text? Right, so Edward, what I will tell you is during that pre-teach, remember that second stage of a reading lesson, the vocabulary pre-teach, that is where you're teaching the pronunciation of the new words you're pre-teaching. So for example, if you're pre-teaching the word mansion, right? I would try to elicit the word first, asking my students, right, do you know of any, what do we call those really big houses? Very often celebrities live in these houses. What do we call them? Your students might say mansion, they might not, but you need to teach it, right? Now we focus on the pronunciation of the word. So I would say to them, right, let's say it together, mansion, mansion. How many syllables do you hear in this word? Mansion, 2, right? Which syllable is a little stronger? Let's say the word again. So you're teaching the pronunciation and then you're asking some concept questions. So yes, you absolutely deal with pronunciation even in a reading lesson. And that all gets done in that second stage, which is the vocabulary pre-teach stage. All right, great question. Thank you for asking. And then we have a question about the webinar. Are you going to upload today live on YouTube? As I mentioned earlier, this webinar will be available in a day or two. So I'm going to say Lucky Love 90, just wait until Monday-ish, and then it will be available latest Monday afternoon. But also remember that we've got other recordings of similar webinars. So please go onto our YouTube channel and you'll be able to access all of them and watch them in your own time. All right. But yes, today's webinar will be uploaded, I want to say Monday, Tuesday latest. All right. So we've got a question here. Can I play a video for eliciting the target language after the warmer? You can. Absolutely, you can. If the video doesn't expose the target language, because sometimes the videos show the target language when you're actually trying to elicit the target language. So if it's a video of you maybe want to elicit the sentence, she was walking, then you can show them the video and you can ask them, what is she doing, right? She is walking. How do we say that in the past? And then try to elicit. So as long as your video doesn't expose, maybe in written form or in spoken form, the model of the target language you're trying to elicit, then you're fine with the video. If you keep it nice and short, because remember, you've got a lot to cover in the presentation stage. So that's absolutely okay. All right. So Rachel, you are so welcome. The session is meant to be helpful, but I will tell you it can be overwhelming because remember, in the course, we take you through the different structures 1 unit at a time. And here you are in one webinar, in 1 hour, listening to all these structures. But that's what I mean. This webinar is just to highlight what we do when we lesson plan, the different structures. But take your time when you're on the course and ask many questions. Contact us at Tutor Support. We're more than happy to hold your hand through the process. And we really do. You can ask some of the people on this chat. We really do hold your hand. All right. So you're absolutely welcome. Something we do need you to do, and we ask this with every single episode that we screen, and that is that you please fill in the survey. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. Right, let's put it there. We are going to need you to fill in the survey. If you click on it and it says that you've already filled it in, that's okay. If you haven't, let us know how we're doing and just hear your thoughts, because this feedback really helps us get better. Yeah, right? So, and that's what we want for you. I'm going to answer this last question, right? When is it, or I think you mean when does it become quicker to do the lesson plan? I want to end on this note, right? In the beginning, I will tell you, you kind of overplan and you overdo it. But as you go along, it becomes a bit easier. So you know what? I'm going to suggest, Sharon, while you're doing the course, plan little lessons. Look at the structure we're teaching, plan your own lesson, see how it compares to the model, just to kind of keep going with the practice. And then you'll see, even within the course and with the practice you're doing, it becomes quicker and quicker and quicker. And eventually, you're walking into a class having planned the lesson just 10 minutes before. It's all possible. So I promise you, it doesn't take this long forever. It gets quicker. All right. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the webinar. I really am sorry if there are a couple of questions. Okay, so this one here is a whole other kettle of fish. You know what I'm going to say to you? Watch our webinar on pronunciation. It really does deal with this problem because it can be quite overwhelming in the class with all those accents, right? And then finally, what advice can you give if a lesson is planned for students to speak the same language as the teacher? Yeah, total immersion. Your students have got to survive in English. You plan your lesson to teach English, so you don't incorporate any of their first language. They've got to be able to converse, to ask questions, and survive in English. All right. So if I didn't get to your questions, I really hope I did try and get to everybody's questions. Send us your questions on Tutor Support. We're waiting for them and we're ready to answer them. But yeah, today has come to an end. It's been fun. It's been interesting. I really hope that I've answered most of your questions and that you've understood the aspects of lesson planning a little bit better. But yes, do ask on Tutor Support and enjoy the rest of your course. All right, and that is the end of today. Remember, this webinar available in just a few days. Fill in the survey and please join next week. Same time, same place, different tutor, but just as packed with information. Have a good weekend and we'll see you next time.